Hello, and welcome to Trans Truth, the podcast dedicated to dispelling myths, fear, and ignorance about transgender people. Along the way, we'll be sharing items of interest to the transgender community, from political and news events to health, fashion, and beauty. And now, let's have a look at some news items that should be of interest to our listeners. Holy cow! There has been a lot of news of late about things affecting the trans community. So we thought that an episode dedicated to catching up with those stories that broke on or about the month of April 2025 was in order. So let's jump right in. In a story that showcases, yet again, the Trump administration's utter disregard for the health and well-being of the 2.3 million trans people in this country, the New York Post gleefully reports that the National Institute of Health has cut $620,288 worth of federal funding from a program researching the prevention of pregnancy in transgender boys. The grant had been provided to the Center for Innovative Public Health Research, a nonprofit public health research group, to address an admittedly rare public health problem. Quote, youth who are assigned female at birth and identify as transgender, not as girls, but at risk for negative sexual health outcomes, yet are effectively excluded from sexual health programs, unquote. Grant data given to the government explained. Oh yes, taxpayers should not have to fund anything that might benefit only a small group of citizens, especially if those taxpayers don't understand or are made uncomfortable by that group. Yes, sarcasm intended. Let's be clear, when it comes to transgender issues, this action, like most of those taken by Republicans over the last several years, is about one thing and one thing only: being cruel to trans people for political points. Not only do they not care about the issue of pregnancy affecting trans boys, they cruelly boast about what they are doing. They know that the public, being largely ignorant of the realities of gender identity, can be manipulated by fear-mongering and appeals to the hatred of minorities that is so common among their base. Thoughts, Jerian?
Oh, yeah. I've got three points. First of all, this study about preventing pregnancy in trans boys falls under the larger umbrella of teen pregnancy, preventing teen pregnancy. Now, yeah, given the particular and peculiar health concerns involving this situation with, trans boys possibly on puberty blockers, maybe on male hormones, preventing pregnancy typically involves female hormones. So yeah, it's got to be a complicated thing. Another thing though is, what the heck? Somebody thought this was important, and someone decided that to assign funds or appropriate funds for this study to benefit the health of teenagers. Just give it up. Let it go this time. So, and another thing, these people that are bragging about this hateful action are more than likely going to sit in church Sunday and just talk about the love of Jesus, Christian love each other, and all this kind of stuff. Practice hate 6 days a week. Do the love thing 1 day a week, Are you kidding me?
You know, as the saying goes, there's no hatred quite like Christian love. Okay, in talking about this story in show prep, you brought up an interesting point, another angle that I hadn't thought about, and that's trans boys, biological girls, probably very often fall through the cracks of all of the health programs aimed at teenage girls, biological girls. So, yeah, that's another reason why I can see there being a reason for, funds dedicated specifically to this small group.
Yeah, here's the deal. The trend is to deny health services because they identify as trans, another gender, and on the other hand, they can't get typical health care for someone who's identified female at birth. So they're in no man's land. They just slipped in a black hole.
That they did. And we're going to talk more about the right's approach to what they think is appropriate care for transgender people in a story or two.
Yeah, well, this story is bizarre. I've just got to say, I mean, the money's already been allocated. Let it go this time, at least. Every legislative session, every budget appropriation period, you do a needs assessment and establish priorities. This was a priority at some point in time. At least this time, let it go.
Yep.
And if you're gonna do something so hateful and shady, then do it covertly. Don't brag about it, for crying out loud. So, I mean, God might hear them brag about it. Just saying. So, okay, what else you got, Kelly? Come on, this is gonna be fun.
By the way, just a reminder. Links to all of these stories are in the episode notes on our website. The New York Times reports that Senator Josh Hawley, a Republican who had been cold to the idea of confirming Dr. Mehmet Oz as the head of Medicare and Medicaid, has now said that he will vote for Oz. In fact, he did. This after Oz told him that he would no longer support transgender care for minors. And this despite the fact that Dr. Oz is no doubt fully aware of the overwhelming consensus of medical and mental health experts that age-appropriate, gender-affirming care is the standard of care for those of any age who suffer from gender dysphoria. The harm that will be done by this physician's systematic nullification of the standard of care for Medicare and Medicaid recipients, at least, should see him lose his license to practice medicine. It is not the least bit hyperbolic to say that should the senator, his Republican colleagues, and now apparently Dr. Oz have their way, people, including children, will die for want of care according to that standard. Shame on them all.
Lord have mercy. Dr. Oz has exchanged the Hippocratic Oath for the hypocritic oath. My gosh, a doctor just changing his mind, not supporting standards of care, standards of medical care for human beings. Are you kidding me? Dr. Oz is a nutcase, a true nutcase. I didn't care for him when Oprah exposed him like a virus to the public, and that's just gotten worse over the years. My goodness.
Yeah, we should point out that the term standard of care is not just a good idea. It's not just a matter of opinion. It is a term of art, if you will, recognized by the healthcare community as the right way to do things, and from which, should a caregiver deviate, that caregiver can expect negative legal consequences.
Exactly. The standards of care are not some set of woke opinions. These are medical professionals and scientific community coming together to, let's see, what am I trying to say? Examine the latest in research and decide what's best for the physical and mental health of human beings, plain and simple. But you know what? When you run for office and get elected, all of a sudden you become the wisest son of a bitch ever lived, and you know way more than doctors and teachers and everybody else. But anyway, my gosh, Kelly, this episode getting my blood pressure up.
Yeah.
Let me see if I
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, let me see if I can stand one more of these news stories before I start throwing up in my mouth.
Well, you know what my life has been like for the last several years. Before I retired, I was a professional in the area of information security. And invariably, whenever Congress decided to take up this or that latest information security threat, they'd get it wrong, invariably. And that's been going on since the days of the, what they call that set-top box chip that was supposed to, let people censor cable TV.
The Clipper chip was a chipset that was developed and promoted by the United States National Security Agency.
You know where I came from. They did the censoring for you, where I come from.
Okay, back to the news. Happily, it would appear that in some states, at least, lawmakers, Democratic lawmakers to be clear, are working to provide further protections for trans people. Colorado Public Radio reports that ahead of the Trans Day of Visibility, Democrats in the Colorado State Senate introduced a resolution in support of the transgender citizens of that state. Said Senator Lisa Cutter of Jefferson County, transgender Coloradans are part of the fabric of our communities. They are parents, students, caregivers, faith leaders, and neighbors. Not surprisingly, their Republican colleagues refused to support the resolution and remained seated during the activity. That hateful and ignorant opposition has not deterred the Democrats of the Colorado legislature, who have introduced 2 bills aimed at further protecting trans rights in Colorado. House Bill 25-1309 would make it illegal for health insurance companies to deny or limit coverage for gender-affirming care when it is considered medically necessary by a patient's doctor. And House Bill 25-1312 would implement a slew of protections for trans people in schools and the courts. That measure is named after Kelly Loving, a transgender woman who was killed in the 2022 mass shootings at an LGBTQ+ nightclub, Club Q, in Colorado Springs. Under the bill, school dress codes could not be based on gender and would have to allow students to dress according to any version of the dress code. The measure would also create new requirements for school policies around students' chosen names. And in the judicial arena, the bill would provide protections during child custody hearings, prohibiting using a transgender parent's identity against them, and would shield parents who allow their kids to get gender-affirming care. And get this, it would also make it a violation of the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act to purposefully misgender someone. While I applaud the sentiment, I predict a round or 2 of First Amendment challenges in court when ignorant assholes want to defend their right to hurl juvenile insults at trans people. No, really, y'all know me and my view on First Amendment rights. I am firmly in the camp of let the ignorant assholes say their piece and show to the world their ignorance and assholiness.
Okay. I'm not familiar with Colorado politics. Who has the majority? Democrats or
Yes,
Republicans?
Democrats.
Democrats. Okay.
Yeah.
So these two bills have a decent chance of passing?
Almost certainly. Yeah, Colorado's always been of late is a very progressive state. They were the first state to legalize marijuana.
Oh, no. Okay, so let me ask this. What are the chances of our federal government passing legislation that jerks a rug out from under state legislation in terms of protections and human rights?
They are, I say 100% because they've already been doing that. Not so much legislation, but in one executive order after another, that has been exactly what is going on in Washington.
Well, you know what? The executive orders are kind of like taking a stick and whacking a hornet's nest. There's nothing good about that. And eventually you can deal with every single one of those hornets, but your life will get stung and be painful in the process. These executive orders, obviously a lot of them are just not legal, and they will be cut down in time by the courts, I hope.
Yeah, and in fact, they already are. Almost all of Trump's anti-transgender executive orders have been challenged and are at least temporarily nullified. For example, the executive order that he used to try and expel approximately 17,000 active duty transgender military service members. That's been struck down repeatedly. And obviously it's going to end up in the Supreme Court, which is a rubber stamped kangaroo court. So it's anybody's guess as to how that will turn out. But the good news is that the judicial branch of our government is trying to hold the would-be dictator in check.
Okay. Well, we'll have to wait and see what comes about in Colorado. I wonder, what is the cost of living in Colorado? Just saying.
Oh, I've been looking into it. Fox News is reporting that Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, will be holding a hearing about USA Fencing's punishment of Stephanie Turner for refusing to fight a trans woman opponent in a recent tournament. Well, you may or may not have seen the news stories. Turner took a knee in her bout with that trans woman rather than compete with her. And apparently that runs counter to USA Fencing's rules of decorum and the conducting of matches. I'm a little fuzzy on that. We'll talk about the details of that more in a moment, but I always thought that a surrender was at least a moderately honorable approach to a duel. Anyway, we'll talk about that more in a moment. First of all, though, what the fuck is Doge doing getting involved in this? What possible jurisdiction could a non-governmental group have when it comes to this? Oh, wait, I see. The chairman of the Doge subcommittee is Marjorie Taylor Greene. So it's just political grandstanding rather than any kind of search for actual justice. Now, I did a little fencing in college. I sucked at it and won only one bout. Most of my losses were to cis female opponents. I bring this up only to establish my bona fides when it comes to fencing and its rules and traditions. According to the USA Fencing Rulebook, to which Turner had agreed in writing, trans women are allowed to compete. According to the USA Fencing officials, Turner's actions, refusing to compete, violated those rules. Again, I make no claim to be an expert on those rules, but I will make 2 observations. I can find no specific rule that would warrant punishment of any kind for a combatant surrendering by taking a knee, as Turner did. And modern fencing is born of European sword fighting. For centuries, duels were fought as a matter of and according to rules of honor. Nowhere in history did those rules compel a combatant to participate in a duel. A surrender was, of course, an explicit admission of lack of honor, but just as dishonorable would have been punishing the surrendering combatant. So why am I rattling on about honor and tradition in a story about the carryings on of Elon Musk and Marjorie Taylor Greene? I have no fucking idea.
Okay. The Department of Government Efficiency
Yep.
is going to investigate USA Fencing, an association. Now, if USA Fencing is a government department or a government entity in any way, shape, or form, it's news to me.
It's not.
So, USA Fencing, it'd be kind of like NASCAR.
Yeah.
UIL, University Interscholastic League. So why would the Department of Government Efficiency be investigating an association?
Oh, you know the answer for that. I mean, the whole reason Doge was created so that they could do things to gain political points for the Trump administration and the right-wing nuts.
You know, all of this is going to look so foolish in the history books.
Oh my God, yes. So, in case you missed it, The Guardian reports that the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom has, in a spectacularly political move, ruled that gender identity is defined solely by biological sex at birth. The case was brought to the Supreme Court by the gender-critical campaign group For Women Scotland, which is backed financially by another TERF, trans-exclusionary radical feminist, and all-around shitty human being, J.K. Rowling. Once again, we are seeing fear and ignorance-based politics acting in complete contravention of virtually all expert advice. I, for one, hope that I live long enough to see history label these actions for the embarrassingly stupid moves that they are. I mean, there were more than a few in the U.S. that thought that the Dred Scott decision was right and just. Yes, Scott v. Sanford was a U.S. case, but I bring it up because it is, according to Britannica.com, widely considered to be, quote, the worst decision ever rendered by the Supreme Court. The most egregious example in the court's history of wrongly imposing a judicial solution on a political problem, end quote. Leave it to the British to put it so eloquently. Anyway, mark my words, history will judge these judicial actions affecting trans people just as harshly.
Okay, I hope one of our listeners in Great Britain will go to the website and do some explanation for me. A lot of the opposition that the trans community is facing is fueled by Christian nationalism. But to the best of my knowledge, I don't think that Christian nationalism is even a popular fuel in Great Britain. If I
don't
recall
think so.
correctly, the Great Britain has a fairly low percentage of people professing to be Christian. So I wonder where the fuel's coming from for this stuff.
First of all, you're absolutely right. Christian nationalism is for the most part, uniquely American phenomenon, at least to the extent that it is in the United States. And to be fair, the Christian nationalists have only gained the profile they have since Barack Obama's first term. Appeals to, let's call them unfashionably racist, xenophobic haters was discovered to be a fairly effective campaign tool. Remember the Tea Party and so forth. So, I think that's why you see it in this country. And I think they don't call it that. They're not after creating, in Great Britain, they're not after creating a Christian nation. But the conservative politicians are still willing to exploit the attitudes from that quarter.
So this is just conservatism and natural tendency for some people to hate on other people?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
And to be fully cynical, it's the politicians' willingness to exploit that sorry segment of human nature that hates that way.
All right. Well, what else you got?
Okay. Well, in yet another related story, The Guardian reported this week that Victoria McLeod, a retired UK judge and the first transgender person to sit on the bench in the UK, is taking the UK to the European Court of Human Rights over the UK Supreme Court's ruling on biological sex. McLeod is arguing that the Supreme Court's ruling is contrary to Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights, which guarantees the right to a fair trial in both criminal and civil matters. Last year, McLeod sought leave to join the litigation in the Supreme Court case brought by the gender-critical campaigners for Women Scotland against the Scottish government, arguing it would significantly affect legal protections for transgender women. Her appeal was rejected. McLeod, now a litigation strategist at W Legal, told The Guardian, quote, "The basis is that the Supreme Court refused to hear me or my evidence to provide them with information about the impact on those trans people affected by the judgment and failed to give any reasons," end quote. The article is lengthy but well worth the read. As always, links are in the episode notes. But before we move on, let me share this gem from that article. Medics at the British Medical Association, BMA, Resident Doctors Conference in London recently passed a motion stating that, quote, "attempting to pose a rigid binary has no basis in science or medicine," end quote. Once again, the smart people, the actual experts, are pointing out the folly of how popular politics is dealing with these issues.
I don't know. I got nothing on that one. My goodness. That's just what I said a while ago. When you get elected to office, you become wise beyond measure, expert on everything.
Yeah. I've said it before. I have to hand it to the Republican strategists who have raised fear-mongering and identifying an other for the target of that fear-mongering to a fine art. Used to be African Americans, 1930s Germany, it was the Jews. I guess it's just our turn in the barrel. Well,
the fear-mongering is, my gosh, it's really spread. Even now, 100+ days into a new administration, it is still Democrats this and Democrats that. The Biden economy, Biden inflation. I mean, who's president, for crying out loud? It's and along with that is still fear mongering against trans people. Very subtle fear mongering involving racism, but certainly anyone with brown skin born in another country south of the border, the fear mongering has been perfected to an art.
Well, I guess there's a reason why in his last term, when I don't know, some reporter or journalist brought up the undereducated, Donald Trump seized on that and said, "I love the undereducated." No doubt.
Yeah. Don't get me started on that.
CNN reports that in an all too predictable move, the Trump administration is suing the state of Maine over refusing to comply with a ban on transgender athletes in high school sports. I think that was another executive order. Anyway, in a fit of pique, not to mention no small amount of irony and ignorance, the Trump administration is alleging that Maine is violating Title IX prohibitions against discrimination based on sex in schools that receive federal aid. I'm sure you can see the irony that I do. If it weren't so patently mean-spirited, the action would be laughable for the degree of ignorance that underpins their reasoning in taking such action. Like most of the actions, including executive orders, undertaken by the pussy grabber-in-chief since taking office, this one is not at all about protecting women, but all about demonizing a tiny fraction of the population for political points.
Does Maine even have a trans athlete, you think?
I think they got one.
Okay. Well, hey, let's pass some laws. Let's pass some laws prohibiting something that's never happened. Makes sense.
Yeah. We talked about this last episode. The whole issue of trans athletes and letting that become a central political issue is, we think, bad strategy. Yes, my LGBTQ plus brothers and sisters and advocates will probably take us to task for this, but in an era when we need to gain a majority to make any meaningful change at all, focusing on such a narrow segment of the population seems to be counterproductive.
Okay, let's move on.
Okay. The Associated Press reports that a federal judge on Friday partially blocked the Trump administration from enacting a policy that bans the use of the X marker used by many non-binary people on passports, as well as the changing of gender markers. In a case brought by the American Civil Liberties Union on behalf of 6 transgender and non-binary plaintiffs, U.S. District Court Judge Julia Kobik has granted a motion for a preliminary injunction which stays the action while the lawsuit plays out. Wrote Judge Kobik, quote, "The executive order and the passport policy on their face classify passport applicants on the basis of sex and thus must be reviewed under intermediate judicial scrutiny. That standard requires the government to demonstrate that its actions are substantially related to an important governmental interest. The government has failed to meet this standard." End quote. Wow. In one court case after another, judges have been saying that the administration's anti-trans actions are motivated by nothing but animus for this tiny fraction of our population. To be fair, they are also getting their asses handed to them in court for their recent attempts to unconstitutionally rendition alleged gang members to concentration camps in other countries without due process. If my grin looks smug, okay, but just know that we're a long way from a decisive win in either case. Please give some serious consideration to supporting the American Civil Liberties Union. They are working the front lines in this battle against fascism and dictatorship. You will find a link to the ACLU in the episode notes and in the useful links page on our website, www.transtruth.info. Again, all the hateful executive orders and legislation are being fueled by nothing but animus and ignorance. That would be bad enough, but as the ACLU tells us, even in states with inclusive policies, federal actions are impacting trans people's lives, especially that of children. The linked article comes from the New Mexico ACLU website. New Mexico has been a very progressive state, but now these federal actions are casting a long shadow over families with trans kids. While the right-wing nuts claim to be wanting to prevent child abuse, the plain fact is that denying gender-affirming care, according to virtually every professional organization of those providing care to trans kids, is the actual abuse.
Well, you can't expect much more from an administration that in the previous term locked little kids in chain link cages at the border. So,
they got better. Now they just deport, or now they just rendition them with mama to concentration camps.
Yeah. It's what is child abuse anyway? You have to be white and middle to upper class to even qualify for any kind of abuse or protections. So, what the heck?
So, CBS News reports that Dr. Renee Richards, the 90-year-old trans woman who rose to fame in the 1970s by competing in women's professional tennis, has recently weighed in on the whole fairness issue when it comes to trans women competing against cis women. Admitting that her views have evolved, Richards now believes that transgender women who transition after puberty should not compete in women's sports. While we would agree, in general, with Dr. Richards' opinion on that, we point out yet again that determining fairness in athletic competition is an unavoidably complicated and nuanced process, and one that deserves far more thought than is typically provided by politicians pandering to public opinion. Dr. Richards is aghast, however, at broader restrictions on transgender rights that may have been imposed during the Trump administration's first 100 days. As we pointed out in our last episode, the right's focus on fairness when it comes to women's sports is the camel's nose getting into the tent of the larger discussion of trans rights. Like Dr. Richards, we believe firmly that tying the fairness in women's sports issue to the larger issue of trans rights in general is a strategic mistake.
Yeah, the trans athletes, I think we mentioned this in the last episode. We need to just leave that alone. Let's sort that out later.
Yeah.
There are bigger fish to fry right now. Trans rights, protections, medical care, housing,
right,
employment. Let's deal with these larger issues first. Now, I'm not saying that a trans athlete doesn't have a right to compete, but let's not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
So, to underscore and support that assertion, we point to a recent poll conducted by 19th News and SurveyMonkey, which has found that 49% of Americans think politicians should not be focusing on transgender issues at all. That's up from 43% in just the last year. Now, I did not major in political science, but I did get high marks in the courses I did take at university. I'll spare us all the painful theoretical discussion and simply repeat, yes, again, the words of J. William Fulbright. In order to be a statesman, you must first get elected. And remind our listeners of what we said in our last episode, that the Democratic Party fell for the bait that was dangled by the Republicans and followed it right out into traffic, where the bus of kitchen table issues ran us down, with the GOP at the wheel. Even an incompetent political operative like Donald Trump has grasped that much.
And I saw this morning where one of them is pretty well known, one is arguing, fighting like crazy over men being able to play in women's sports. I said, I thought that was tried. I thought that was about a 95, I think it's a 95% issue. But in a way, I want them to keep doing it because I don't think they can win a race. I tell the Republicans, I said, don't bring that subject up because there's no election right now. But about a week before the election, bring it up because you can't lose.
No, we are not saying that trans issues are not important, but we are saying that in order to be in a position to affect the change we all want, we need a political strategy that can get us there.
Yeah, this is like a flashback to last episode. What the Democratic Party needs to do now is just leave the little social issues alone. Let's find some big targets and use those to convince the electorate that the current people in power need to go. All they're talking about is trans this and border that and on and on and on, while the economy crashes, retirement accounts zero out, cost of living increases, and human rights are being negated. So again, I guess we're going to have to deal with this in every episode, so that these can be very important talking points to our listeners.
Oh, I agree. And by the way, listeners, if you'd like to weigh in on this, please speak up. We encourage comments, questions, criticism, whatever, at info@transtruth.info. Okay, and finally, PBS is reporting that Trump's Department of Health and Human Services has issued a 409-page report that, quote, sharply contradicts guidance from the American Medical Association, which has urged states not to ban gender-affirming care for minors, unquote. Once again, that's the American Medical Association saying you shouldn't be doing this. The AMA is saying that empirical evidence has demonstrated that trans and non-binary gender identities are normal variations of human identity and expression. Normal variations. The American Psychological Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, all of the professional groups involved with the diagnosis and treatment of gender dysphoria, agree. The accepted standard of care is settled on this, unless, I guess, if your agency is headed by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a patently unqualified conspiracy theorist who has no real understanding of actual medical science. Make no mistake, this move, like the others made by Republican politicians at the state and national level over the last few years, is not at all about protecting children from anything. These moves are all about hurting trans people for political points among a tragically misinformed electorate. This move will also cause needless suffering and will cost lives among the pediatric transgender population.
Yeah, you know, you don't hear it very often, but there have been a couple of times in recent years where the term eradicate has been mentioned.
Yes.
A need to or a desire to eradicate trans people from the population. And you know, this is just another effort moving in that direction.
Yeah, it is. And, you know, it's, again, capitalizing on a tragically ill-informed electorate.
And a portion of the population who is just naturally inclined to at least marginalize and discriminate, if not outright hate human beings.
Well, I don't know, Jerry Ann, have we expressed our thoughts well enough for this episode?
I guess, you know, Kelly, I don't want our listeners to think that I am anti-trans, quite the contrary. But in order for transgender people to have just basic human rights, and then, you know, later hopefully have specific rights and protections, we need to deal with the bigger issues. You know, I use the expression with you all the time when we talk privately. We have bigger fish to fry, and that's what the Republicans did. They were frying some big ass fish, while the Democrats were fishing for perch. And
Yep.
and in order for us to get the right people in power, that's what we need to do. We need to go after big game fishing, and we'll come back and we'll put a safety net around the perch.
Well said. Well said. And once again, we realize that this is probably going to rub at least some of our listeners the wrong way. But I think it's an essential discussion to have. Again, I'm not a poli-sci major, but I got good grades in it. So bring it.
Well, that makes one of us. So,
Okay.
you know, if someone needs to express their opinion, I'm open for it. You know, I've just expressed mine, and I, you know, I don't have the only opinion. I don't have all the answers, but we got to do something different.
Okay.
If we don't do something different, we're going to make Einstein proud in his grave.
All right. Well, once again, thank you for listening, and we will talk to you again soon.
Bye, y'all.
You have been listening to Trans Truth, the podcast that speaks the truth about what it means to be transgender. We hope that you have found this episode to be informative and enlightening, whether you are transgender yourself, if you have a friend or loved one who is transgender, and especially if you are simply looking to understand more about the transgender experience. Copyright 2025, Trans Truth.